What if I told you that you didn't always have to shoot with a tripod? That you can actually be more creative without one? And that all these images were taken handheld? Hey guys, my name's Dan Ballard. I'm a pro travel, landscape, and commercial photographer. Almost everybody is told from the time they pick up a camera that if you're going to do landscape photography, you have to use a tripod. Now, yes, there are a lot of situations and a lot of circumstances where a tripod is mandatory. If you're doing things like long exposures, if you're shooting waterfalls, or anything where you really want to have blurred motion, yes, absolutely, you have to have a tripod. And I would argue that if you're learning photography and you're trying to master using manual settings, that yes, a tripod can be great and can be really helpful. What I think is unfortunate is that everybody has this idea that you have to use the tripod all the time, no matter what. In so many situations, first of all, that's just not true. And second of all, it's absolutely hurting your creativity. I've been teaching photography workshops for a long time now. I work with hundreds of students a year. And every single time, whenever I'm out teaching a workshop, working with clients, one thing that I see is as soon as people set up their tripods for a certain height, that's the height that the tripod stays at for the rest of the shoot. As soon as I get my workshop students off the tripod, their creativity goes through the roof. Their willingness to move around, this is sort of subconscious, right? Like they're not necessarily making this decision, but as soon as that tripod is set up and as soon as it's set up at a certain height, that just kind of becomes the height that they're shooting at. Or they don't move around because it's so challenging to get the tripod set up whenever it's uneven terrain or a really challenging circumstance. So many times these days, I find myself preferring strongly to just walk around and shoot handheld. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about why that is. Why is that possible? Why, for so many years, did every pro say that you needed a tripod? The thing is, that used to be true. Not so long ago, you really did need a tripod for pretty much any serious landscape photography. But things have changed, and they've changed a lot. And the biggest difference is in our cameras and in the ability for our cameras to handle low light situations with things like high ISO and to implement things like focus stacking that we can do hand holding and things like in-body stabilization that lets our lenses and our cameras shoot in much lower light and still have tack sharp results. So, if you're in one of those situations, which I find myself in those situations all the time, where you don't actually have to have a tripod, you have enough light, you're not necessarily trying to get a long exposure type shot. In that situation, hand holding makes so much more sense. It's an absolute complete game changer to be able to move around completely free, to get down super low, to get super close, to try all sorts of different compositions before you take the photograph, or even to take multiple photographs with different compositions. Now, I'm all for going slow, being deliberate, and a lot of those things are really positives of shooting with the tripod. The tripod does make you slow down. I have an article about this where I break all this stuff down. There's some really big advantages to a tripod, even from an artistic standpoint. But I feel like there's many more advantages whenever you're not constrained to those heights or to having to set up, to having to work for every single movement that you want to make. Whenever you're hand holding, you can just completely dial in your composition and you can dial in a lot of compositions, and it gives you this freedom to still think slowly, still be really deliberate, still, really pay attention to everything you're doing, but you can do that more times. You can do that multiple times. You can slow down, think, be critical, really dial in your composition, take your shot, and then maybe move just a little bit And again, slow down, be critical, really dial in your shot and take that image, and then move again, maybe just a few inches side to side. It just completely changes the game and it gives you so much more freedom. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about why we can do that these days. The number one thing is the ability for cameras to shoot at high ISOs and for our cameras to shoot with auto ISO. One of my absolute favorite things to do whenever I'm hand holding is to shoot in aperture priority mode. So that's A or AV mode. Shooting in aperture priority mode with auto ISO turned on will maintain a fast enough shutter speed for you automatically, especially if you have auto ISO turned on to auto. So with auto ISO on auto mode. And if you do that, it knows what focal length lens you're shooting at. And this will actually allow you, or allow your camera, I should say, to maintain a fast enough shutter speed by bumping up the ISO. So you're in the circumstance where the camera basically automatically for you is making sure that you're getting a tack sharp image. With things like in-body stabilization, with lens stabilization, and then now especially with AI denoise, this just opens up a whole new world for us. Like I said, there's still circumstances. If it's really, really dark, I'm absolutely still going to grab a tripod if I can. But with all of these new tools, most of the time I find that I don't need to. And if I'm in a situation even where I maybe should use a tripod, where a tripod would be better, if it's a challenge, if I am hiking, if I'm backpacking, I'm coming up on a big bike packing trip here in a few weeks, and I'm just not going to take a tripod because I really don't want the extra weight. So, in those circumstances where I can't, or it's easier to not have a tripod, that's where I can shoot handheld and still get a very high quality image. With AID noise now, man, even if you're pushing the ISO to a point where it's not ideal, where you can really start to see the noise, it absolutely just helps take care of it. Now, again, I can't stress enough, if it's easy to use a tripod, if it's really dark, if you really have this need to, of course, use one. You still lose things like dynamic range. So shooting at low ISOs is better overall because you have higher dynamic range. So there's still absolutely reasons, there's still absolutely circumstances. But if you're in a situation where you have plenty of light to where your auto ISO is only bumping up, um, the ISO number to, I don't know what that number would be, maybe 1600, something like that. Like if you can keep that ISO reasonable, especially if it's 800 or 400 or a very low number, in that situation, I mean, absolutely, it just makes so much sense to handhold your camera versus using the tripod. Because in that situation, you're not losing dynamic range. The quality is going to be amazing. You have that extra freedom. Other than maybe that idea of the tripod forcing you to slow down, other than that, there's really no downside to just shooting handheld. So I absolutely encourage you to do that. One thing that I notice in my workshops is I have people all the time. I'll go through all this, I'll talk about this, I'll really encourage them. Hey guys, it's still, it's before the sunset light is starting. We've got plenty of light to work with here. You can shoot handheld and just get amazing shots. You'd never ever be able to tell the difference between this shot handheld versus on a tripod, and you should really try this. And I have students all the time that are basically just like, no way. Like I've been told that I have to have a tripod, and I'm not going to do it, and that's where they're comfortable. And I think it's such a big mistake. I see it all the time where they set the tripod up and then they just stay there, and they're just not being creative at all in those circumstances. So I absolutely encourage you to give that a try. The other thing, and I'm going to make a whole video on this topic alone, but you don't have to be in manual mode all the time. People confuse this idea that manual mode versus aperture priority or shutter priority, that's going to somehow affect how the picture looks overall. And it's really not. Aperture priority versus manual is the same exact thing. It's just aperture priority gets you there a little quicker. Don't get me wrong, I shoot manual all the time. When I'm on a tripod, when I'm shooting at Ricketts Glen, waterfalls, that sort of thing. Of course, I'm always on the tripod. I'm using ND filters. I'm doing long exposures. And, I'm absolutely in manual mode 100%. So I'm not saying don't use manual mode, but when you're walking around, when you're hand holding, you set aperture priority, and you set your aperture, you set your f number, you set that to f5.6 or f8 or whatever it is that you're looking for, and then the camera is automatically going to find the shutter speed for you, and the auto ISO is going to help you maintain the minimum shutter speed that you need. And it just makes things so much easier. There's no downside that the shots are going to be the same, the quality is going to be the same, everything is the same here, except the fact that it's faster and that it's easier to work with that. So I just really highly encourage you to at least try this, to watch your circumstances. If you're in a situation where the tripod isn't 100% mandatory, consider not using it for the freedom. And even if you're in a situation where you need the tripod, again, it's really dark, or you need a long exposure, you're shooting water, even in that circumstance, I still highly encourage you to walk around without the tripod attached to the camera. Walk around, find your composition, and once you find the exact spot, at that point, set the tripod up in that exact spot. Take your shot. But don't get locked into having it on there. At that point, that's when you still, you want to find a new composition, take it back off the tripod, move around, and then reset it back on the tripod to actually take your shot. I just think this is an absolute game changer. It completely opens up your creativity. I think this is huge. I think people are doing themselves this kind of really major disservice and really hurting their photography overall whenever they feel like they're stuck to the tripod and they have to have the tripod on all the time, especially when you're talking about a huge tripod, super heavy, bulky, all of this stuff. Again, I use the tripod all the time. Can't stress that enough, but absolutely consider freeing yourself up and losing the tripod. Thanks for watching. I hope you subscribe and give me a like. Thanks.